What's up, everyone? Welcome to Level 7. It is time for another episode of the Agents of Fandom podcast. I am your host, TJ Zwarich, fresh off a return from the hospital. We are back, and as a dad, recording about, about 5. I think I've been home for about 5 hours now, but so happy to be back in my own house. And although I am taking a break, and the wonderful TJ Pastilli will be stepping in my place for the X-Men 97 and Invincible portion of the episode this week, I had to come in and talk about this wonderful episode of The Bad Batch, joined, as always, by my co-host and good buddy, Adam Blevins. How you doing, Adam?
I'm doing good, man. I'm glad that you are back home, new dad. I'm so excited, so happy for you, man. I got to say, it feels a little nostalgic recording in the evening like this. You know, when I first joined the podcast team, became a co-host, we were only doing live shows. So we were always live at 7, 8, sometimes 9 o'clock. And then we shifted to recordings, and now it's like we record early afternoon, at the latest like 4 or 5 o'clock. So I'm feeling nostalgic right now. It brings me back. But yeah, I'm excited to talk about this episode because what an episode it was.
I think it was definitely my favorite episode of The Bad Batch we've seen so far. And I think for sure one of the better episodes of Star Wars animation as well. And that's someone who has a Star Wars animation to our episode arc as my favorite Star Wars anything. So I feel like that's pretty high praise coming into this one. But one of the reasons why it was such a special episode is we got the introduction of Asajj Ventress into episode 9 of The Bad Batch. And so we brought in not just the biggest Asajj Ventress fan, but the authority on the character, co-host of Padro Pascal, Catrina Dennis. How are you doing?
I am having the best day of my life. I mean, not to compare it to you. You just had a baby. Like, I feel like that comes above the rung of like your favorite character returning in Star Wars. But you know, you and I were both having really, really good days, I think.
Exactly. I couldn't agree more. And that's the funny thing is I really compare this to, so my favorite character in Star Wars is Ahsoka. And obviously Ahsoka and Ventress have had some very big arcs together. Mm-hmm. But what this episode of The Bad Batch really reminded me of, and we'll get into this more later, was Ahsoka's first appearance in The Mandalorian, where it just felt that mystical of this wasn't just a one-off. There are important things with this character coming. And so before we even get into the specifics of the episode, and I was going to start talking about some other things, but now that we've already talked about Ventress, let's just dive in. What is your connection to this character? Why do you love them so much? And who is Asajj Ventress for those who are maybe watching The Bad Batch and haven't tuned in to all the external other stuff?
Yeah, so my connection to the character, along with Ventress simply being like my favorite character of all time with Star Wars, which I think is quite a big thing to say. I have actually, I'm the co-founder of Ventress Day, which is a yearly celebration of Asajj Ventress online, November 14th every single year, which is the day that she debuted in the Genndy Tartakovsky Star Wars show or Clone Wars show. We celebrate her as a character. We post art. We just talk about how great she is. I was a consultant on Star Wars Brotherhood, specifically for Ventress's character. Mike Chen brought me in to talk about where her sabers were placed for a specific scene so that Obi-Wan would notice them and then stare at her hips for a little too long. And yeah, I've been connected to this character for a really long time because I'm very loud and passionate about her. And for the past 10 years, I've just been saying, she's not dead. She's just sleeping. She's just having a little late nap. And so today, like I said, has been like the best day ever. And then who is Asajj Ventress? Asajj Ventress is a Dathomirian Night sister who was originally first a slave. When she was born, she was taken from her coven in exchange for their safety and made into a slave on the planet Ratatak. Then she was taken in by a Jedi master, became a Jedi Padawan until she was a teenager, and was unfortunately the witness of her master's death, which made her turn to the dark side and made her very, very easy pickings for Count Dooku, who took her on as one of his acolytes. She was one of the biggest, I would say one of the strongest fighters in the Clone Wars. And I say that because the Jedi Council routinely sent Anakin and Obi-Wan their absolute best to handle her. And throughout the Clone Wars, we see her have this extremely long arc of, and satisfying arc, I would think, of becoming this completely different person, going from being an acolyte of the Sith to a bounty hunter who is carving her own very unique path in the Force, and something that we don't see often. Who is, someone who is not a Jedi or a Sith, but their own definition of a Force user. And like you said, she has run in with Ahsoka quite a bit, and I find their stories and their arcs to be kind of like parallel opposites. I also find that to be kind of similar with Ventress and Anakin, which is there's a whole like rant I could go on about like why Palpatine played them against each other, because they became allies. It would have been very bad for him. And eventually she meets the Jedi Quinlan Vaz. They hook up, they fall in love, and she sacrifices herself for to save him from the dark side. And for a very long time, that was the last we knew of with Ventress. Her redemption arc just ended there, and it didn't satisfy me, because her redemption shouldn't have just been in selflessness. I think that a good redemption that we don't really often see in Star Wars is someone atoning, someone doing good for the world, someone redefining who they are. And we've gotten that a lot this season with Crosshair. So it was really nice to see Ventress come into the fold with this latest episode. She is back. She is searching for people who have M counts, which I'm sure we'll talk about very within the episode. And I have my theories about what she's up to and why she is up to it. And she's like a Hollywood body, so I love her.
I'm going to bump a few early thoughts in the rundown here to the end of the episode, because I do want to just dive right into it, because this was such an exciting episode. So Adam, I want to throw it to you for your general thoughts, because we had speculated in previous weeks of what, who Fennec was talking to, who her source was. We got the screeners for the first 8 episodes, and we've been waiting on that cliffhanger for the longest time. And we finally get the answer, and I think we're going to see more of Ventress in the future too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly hope so, and it was so nice to finally watch something and be here talking about something new and not having to rewatch, because I think we last watched episode 8, like you said, when we got the screeners. Seems like sometime in early February, maybe even late January, sometime way back then. I felt like I wasn't even that far removed from watching What If when I was watching The Bad Batch. So it's so nice to kind of throw myself back in and get something fresh like this. But this was just another great episode. But I got it. And I know you two are here to talk me out of this, but I kind of got the feeling that maybe, because one thing that we talked about in the previous episode, I think it was last week, that you said you saw something really, really big in store for Ventress. And like, I love this episode, and she's great in this episode. I agree with you 100%. This is one of the best Star Wars animated episodes ever, but I kind of left feeling a little bit like maybe we're not going to get quite as much from her in the last like few, or like 6 to 7 episodes of this season as we thought, because that just seems to me like it would be a lot to kind of work in what they have going. But they did also set that up that I think they can do it. I'm not saying if they do it that they can't pull it off. That's not at all what I'm saying, but I'd be lying if I said that I wasn't a little bit worried that we're not going to get like plenty of her, like at least 3 or 4 more episodes of her going forward.
It'd be interesting to see too, is there's been so many rumors that although the Bad Batch is done, it could be spinning off into another show of maybe say Rex and him gathering some clones, going up against the Empire and filling in his gaps between the Bad Batch and Rebels. And I think maybe Ventress could come into play there, or who knows, they could have more in store for her as well, because I do think this is a character that is, for how little, I mean, and it's been a decent amount, but for how little of screen time she's had, has a very big fan base. I think almost like Boba Fett-esque, of how everybody loved Boba Fett. And he really wasn't ever on the screen for that much, and before he kind of came back here. But Adam, I want to actually keep it with you for this first part, because you brought up how this was new for us, and that was so great. But am I sleep deprived? Was it just because we saw something? This is the first new episode we've gotten in a while, but did this animation not seem different? It seemed like it was more vivid, more lifelike, and like a completely, like not completely new style, but like a 1080p version throughout this episode, I thought.
So I think where that may be, I mean, I definitely think you're sleep deprived, which is completely understood. Like, just aside from the fact, just in general, I think you're sleep deprived because you just had a baby and you haven't even been home for 12 hours with your baby. So I think that's definitely a factor here. But this episode looked great. I mean, I think all the episodes look great. This kind of smooth animation that they've got going on and all, like, whether it's Clone Wars or and now Bad Batch, like I just love that style in general. I think a lot of this was, I mean, except for when they were in the cave, so much of this episode is very bright. Like, they're standing in the sun, they're doing all these things. We get some, like, they're outside like almost the whole time. They're never standing in these dark buildings. So I think they were kind of shedding a light on more stuff that was going on, but I didn't particularly feel like it looked like I wasn't like, wow, this looks way better. But I thought the whole season has looked great so far. I mean, like I said, I love this animation style, but I think it was more just kind of how they told the story. It seemed much more, which I don't know if that may have even been kind of a conscious choice, because obviously they're showing us that Ventress is not the same character that she was when we see her in the Clone Wars. She's changed, and she's a little more like, or a lot more in the light herself. So maybe that was a conscious decision to have so much of this episode be really, really bright. It's kind of a reminder like, hey, Ventress is good now. But I don't know. I didn't personally feel like, I wasn't struck when I saw that on the rundown. I would kind of chuckle because I was like, yeah, he's definitely sleep deprived.
Catrina, what did you think?
I will chime in and say I think and this is just for me, but with a lot of the past episodes we had in the Clone Wars, especially in her bounty hunter era, her eyes were animated brighter, her skin was easier to like see in the dark. I remember the episode Bounty, when they were on that very dark planet. It was still a very vivid and pretty episode, and I feel like that's my own bias coming into play because of how darn good Ventress looked. Like, you could see the crystalline blue in her eyes, and you can see that with this episode too. I love the little like details in the animation. She has these lightning strike scars on her face that I think tell a whole story about what has happened before off screen. Even if you haven't read Dark Disciple, like that really hints at where she's come from and how far she has come. So I think it's that, and I'll agree with Adam that this episode was a lot more in the light. And even when we did see the darker parts, like at sunset with the fight, there was still a lot of light being cast on them where you could see the fight very vividly. So in my heart, I think this episode was much prettier. But I will say that, like, I also just think it's like my general Ventress bias, where I'm like, her eyes look so pretty. Like, that's where I'm at.
Let's keep it there with, like, what did you think when we see her for the first time? How she looks? What was your first reaction to, like, what has she been through that got her here?
Yeah, I mean, seeing her come straight out of that cave with that like light shone on her, like that shot, it made me jump. I like shouted. There's like video footage of it where I'm just like, ah, like you see her come out of these shadows and she's kind of lit. She reminds me a little bit of how they would light, Morticia Adams or like old style horror movie villains when they come out of the shadows, which I think is a great callback to what her history was and how she's coming into the light in her own way. I hesitate to ever call Ventress light side or Jedi. I think that her path is very much her own and very unique. But that moment was incredible. I'm glad that it was alone with Omega, because Omega needs more female role models. I think Fee is fantastic, but more is never bad. And it was such a great shot, and it also, like, leading into it, I was just like, who's in the cavern? Like, whose ship is that? That's a new ship that we're seeing. It's not the Banshee model that she was supposed to have in Dark Disciple. So yeah, it was a very exciting shot that just provoked quite a few thoughts from me. And I loved it. It was incredible.
Is this something I may have missed from earlier in her story, or was this not even what I was? Is it maybe again I was just sleep deprived? deprived, but does she not have like a Beskar Mandalorian shoulder plate going on right now?
So she had that same shoulder pad in her bounty hunter design. So when she was in the Wrong Jedi, that shoulder plate was part of her armor. But her armor is very different now. It's very, I would say, less decorative and a lot more functional than it was in at the end of the Clone Wars, because we saw her looking very stylish, honestly, for a bounty hunter. And I like that they kept with this interesting like shade of like turquoise blue for her. And I think one of the theories I've seen about that pauldron, and I don't know if it's Beskar, and I don't want to say it is, but the logo on it, people have said that it reminds them of the like a sea snake, the lake snake that was in Dathomir, that was part of Quinlan Vos's tests in Dark Disciple that Ventress put him up to. It's for anyone who hasn't read Dark Disciple, Ventress puts Quinlan through a series of tests to kind of like make him unlock himself to the dark side. And one of the things that she does is have him face this like sea snake that is on Dathomir. It's sort of like a coming of age trial for Night Sisters, where they have to go down, they have to wrestle this sea snake, and they have to cut off one of its scales and come back with it. So I feel like that pauldron is like something of her own design that she has put together to honor her people.
I like it. I think that makes a lot of sense. And that's why we come to you for the Ventress explanations, because that was so eloquently said. Adam, speaking of so eloquently said, not to toot my own horn, but at the beginning of this season, I gave a midichlorian explanation of what, like a little bit of a background of what M count is, what midichlorians are. And I think it was pretty good, but it also took me like 6 minutes. Ventress delivered that to Omega and the Bad Batch clearer and more concise than I think we've ever seen in Star Wars media.
Well, first off, I just got to say, you had me in the first half right there because you said, Adam, speaking of eloquently saying things. And then I was thinking I was getting ready to just catch this nice compliment. And then you were like, when I said this, it was so great. I was like, oh, okay, fuck me, I guess. Then.
See, and I meant it as when Ventress said it, but I delivered that poorly.
Oh, no, I'm just kidding. I'm just giving you a hard. You're a dad now, so I've got to give you a hard time, even more so than I always do on this show. But yeah, no, I mean, it makes perfect sense that she's the one to kind of come in and perfectly explain it and leave the audience kind of sitting there thinking, yeah, that makes, I mean, we all knew. It's interesting they're like navigating this kind of alternate thing where everybody in the show is like, what is M count? Like, what does this even mean? Like, to us, the mystery is, what is Omega's connection to, like, what is her relationship with midichlorians, which we're still, I know we're going to talk about this a little bit later, we're still kind of gray on. And I think Ventress has her own kind of like, not necessarily bad, like not, I don't think bad at all, but her own reasons for kind of keeping some of that to herself and not sharing that with the group. But she did it. She does a great job explaining it. But to me, I was more like, okay, yeah, that's about what I thought. Yeah, I think that's kind of what we all thought. But the answer to the question I think we're all more looking for, that I surely we're going to get explained to us later, is like a very, I don't want to jump ahead, but the explanation that she gives at the end when she's finally, Omega's like, finally, like, so do I have a high M count or what? And then she just is like, yeah, you could be fine with training. I was like, wait, that's it? That's like, I was like, okay, there's got to be more coming to this. But yeah, that's the thing, is that like, while we all kind of knew what it was, it's been fun to watch the characters in the show try to figure this out. And I love when shows do this, because we often talk about on here, I think shows can be, and movies sometimes too, can be really bad about forgetting that you don't have to, like, what the audience is trying to figure out and learn doesn't always have to be the same thing as the characters. You can show us something and not show the characters something. And I like that they're kind of navigating these alternate things and keeping the audience and the characters in different levels of the light and the dark.
One thing I didn't really expect when we got this episode was, even though I was, like everybody else thinking we were getting Ventress, is I did not expect the whole Master and Padawan vibe with Ventress and Omega that we got throughout the whole episode. Like you mentioned, Adam, with those tests. What did you think about their combo together? Because it's crazy to me. Not crazy, but like it's so awesome and well written to see how Ventress interacts with somebody like Omega versus how she interacts with the other clones.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean the biggest thing that struck me was there were 2 times in this episode. I'm glad you brought this up because it had slipped my mind until you just said it now. There were 2 times in this episode, one in particular where Omega reminded me a lot of Anakin, where when Ventress sent her up to the top of the hill, and instead of just like doing some shit like Obi-Wan or somebody or like somebody else would do, where you just like put on a pack and hike up to the top, just make it as hard as possible on yourself. It reminded me of so many times in the Clone Wars where like Anakin would cut corners and come up with all these creative different things. When she sees Batcher down, she's like, you know what? I'm going to take Batcher up to the top of the hill because that's going to make things way easier on me. As soon as I saw that, I was like, that's exactly something. That's something smart, something like Anakin would do. That's the kind of thing that other be like, no, Anakin, you can't cut corners. You can't do any of
Very,
this.
very Anakin Skywalker, Ezra Bridger coded.
Mhm.
Exactly. That it's funny. That's the other Jedi, and we'll talk about the moment that reminded me of Ezra a little bit later in the episode, I'm sure. But those were the 2 that I really saw parallels with. Not as much just Omega, but their kind of relationship, particularly with Anakin and Omega, yes, but more with like the teaching method that Kanan Jarrus took with Ezra. I kind of saw a little bit of that, especially when they were out on the boat. Like I said, we're going to talk about that later, but oh man, yeah, it was great to see that they nailed the whole training dynamic with her because they're right. Like I think a lot of people were worried. Like I'm not the kind of person that wants my characters to have to like struggle. So if Omega would have been naturally gifted with the Force, I'd have been like, you know what, I can believe that because the Empire's out for like they're coming to get her for a reason. And now I almost like what we got more because I'm like, wait, why are they out to get her? Because she clearly didn't show a whole lot in these tests, but I think Ventress saw something that we weren't able to see that we're probably going to learn about later.
One of the things that's so fun about Star Wars extended lore and legends is things don't have to be canon for them to exist in people's minds and exist as parts of their characters, especially because now Dave Filoni is pulling so many aspects of the Star Wars legends and bringing them in. When you Catrina, when you saw Omega and Ventress training together, how much did that get the creative juices flowing? Because I know you're a writer, not just like us in terms of writing articles on stuff, but you've written short stories on the character Ventress that have been published, and so I'll make sure to give you time to plug those at the end more. But did this get those creative juices flowing a little bit of like, ooh, I could write a whole story about these too?
So yeah, absolutely. Because so one of the things that I have like brewing in my head is that now that Ventress is back, and I've posted this all over social media, but a few years back I was like, you know who would be a great master for Rey? Ventress. Ventress would be a great no-nonsense master, cranky old lady who doesn't care about the Jedi or the Sith. She only cares about defining a new path in the Force. And that's where I think Rey was going at the end of the sequel trilogy. So to see that happen with Omega was just so satisfying. I think it's such a great step in not just Omega's journey, but Ventress's journey to see her so patient with someone. She was so calm and so focused, and she stuck around because she saw potential and interest in Omega, I want to say. So it was a very, very cool dynamic that I would absolutely love to see picked up, because I think that Ventress's experiences are so unique that she now, with this like growth that she's had, she would make an incredible teacher for someone, because she wouldn't BS them, which is, that's the best way I can put it. And she would also be patient and be understanding. A lot of the things that I think make her and Omega like simpatico is that she sees a lot of herself in Omega. She sees potential of what she could have been. She sees a life that she could have lived that she wants to defend. And we can get into that a little bit later when we talk about her departure and her decisions with Omega. But I loved that. And I also, to again call to the sequel trilogy, no matter whatever anyone's opinions on it are, I saw shades of Luke's test of Rey. There were 3 tests. Ventress kind of messed around with Omega a little bit. And then we learned a very important lesson. And I loved that echo of like what it is to be a teacher and be an apprentice in this kind of story. So I love that. And like you said, it calls back to shades of like Kanan and Ezra, Anakin and Obi-Wan. And Anakin and Obi-Wan were Ventress's greatest like adversaries I want to say. Obi-Wan maybe not so much, but I think that it's great to see all of these like experiences that she's had, these people who have touched her life kind of echo out in who she is now and what she's doing with Omega.
I have to ask now, since you brought up the sequel trilogy, because this is a theory I've been pumping for a while now, and I don't know that it fully lines up with some things some literature that they put out, but my thought process is like, wow, Omega's force sensitive. Where did that come from? Maybe it's Palpatine's genes. If that's Palpatine's genes, that technically could make her like a child of Palpatine. If she's a child, what if she's Rey's mom? And that would make, adding in your idea of Ventress coming to train Rey in the future, if Omega is Rey's mom, that would make that story even more full circle and cooler. Do you think that theory is batshit crazy or potentially reasonable?
I hate to shut down anyone's theories, so I will not say no. I will not say no, but the math on it doesn't add up to me. Just because we actually don't know how Omega is going to age. We don't know how quickly that's going to go. And it looks like Rey's mom was maybe 25 at best when she gave Rey up. So
that was just Rey's memory,
Yeah,
that was just in her brain.
And how reliable are Force users' memories? Leia remembered her mom through feelings and images, but her mom was dead by the time she was like 5 minutes old. So who knows? But I don't know. I don't know if I see Omega being a mother,
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. I mean, I don't want to shoot it down, but I also don't. I wouldn't say,
Omega is Rey's auntie. I don't know.
Exactly.
There's ways that we could. There's ways that we can make it work for sure.
They can still be it's still clone blood. Especially if this M count thing happens, Omega could be Rey's auntie, her like third cousin twice removed. It can work somehow. I would still love to see those two interact. I want these like legendary women to find their way to Rey, because like that would just make her story so much more special to me. So yeah.
Couldn't agree more there. And one of the things that was so awesome about Ventress in this episode is we got to see some really, really cool, that we don't get to see very often in Star Wars, hand-to-hand fighting. Oh. And that was some of the coolest hand-to-hand fighting animated choreo I think I've ever seen in Star Wars, with Ventress just tossing the guns to the side and dismantling the entire Bad Batch. What did you think of that scene, Adam?
To me, it almost when she taught the whole scene was incredible. But when she tossed the guns, it almost to me read like she was like, you know what? I'm going to test the three of you, the four of you, however, the three of you, to see how capable you are of looking after this girl. Because she just tossed their guns and we've seen the three of them. The whole Bad Batch like kick some serious ass through the 3 seasons of the show. And she made light work of all three of them without her lightsaber, like it was done. It reminds me so much, or it makes me think that, like you said, we don't get hand-to-hand combat in Star Wars often at all. And it's so refreshing to see that being in tune with the Force doesn't just mean, because and obviously there's plenty of great fighters in Star Wars that are not in tune with the Force. We've seen that plenty of times. But somebody like Ventress doesn't even need her lightsaber to kick ass, but that just makes her even stronger. Watching her absolutely beat the shit out of like 3 of the strongest clones, that was the highlight, one of the highlights of the episode, one of the 2 highlights, one of which we're getting ready to talk about next. It was great. The whole scene was great.
Because, like, obviously Crosshair's abilities maybe are not the most hand-to-hand, but Hunter and Wrecker are probably the 2 best fighting clones that there are. And she just, absolutely undressed them. It was hilarious. And it like the confidence she was giving really reminded me of, it was a totally different scene, but the confidence really reminded me of Cap in The Winter Soldier, when he's like, before we begin, does anybody want to get out? Of just like, I know exactly how this fight's gonna go. And I thought it was awesome. What did you think, Catrina?
Oh man. So this fight reminded me a lot. Like, the moment she was like, okay, let's do it hand to hand, I was like, did Wolf ever tell them what happened in The Wrong Jedi? and how like, yeah, she was working with Ahsoka, but like they were taking on about 15 clones at that time, and it was Wolf Squad. And halfway through the fight, Ventress deliberately turns off her lightsaber and just wrecks these dudes. And it ends with her like slamming Wolf's like noggin into a pillar and going like, see, no worries. I'm a new person now. Like I didn't kill any of them. And it just like, it just called, first off, it called back to that. There was a musical note, like a couple like notes in the music that were exactly, I went back and watched it. They are the exact notes that match that scene, which I absolutely love from the Kiners. Like they know how to write poetry with their music. And it was so exciting because it was just this episode was this incredible demonstration of what a skilled fighter, a skilled force user, and really a grown person that Ventress is. So like I could watch that fight scene, and I have watched that fight scene over and over again. It's just perfect.
And immediately after, it led to Ventress dropping just some absolute bars that I loved, because we've seen the themes throughout this season. Adam, we've talked about it with like, oh, former separatists working with Republic senators, and it's like, why? Because that Clone War stuff doesn't matter anymore. You were all being played. You weren't even against each other. You were just helping build somebody else's empire. And that's exactly what Ventress says. Like, we were just pawns in the same war. You may think we're different, but we weren't. We were both being used by the exact same force to accomplish the exact same goal. So it's so interesting to think how, like, obviously there's people like the Bad Batch and the clones who have been always viewed as protagonists until Order 66. And then it's how that they have to figure out their story from there. But for Ventress, we always saw her as an antagonist throughout all of this. But when you look at her story and everything she's gone through in depth, she's no more of an antagonist than the clones. She was a pawn as part of the same war.
She's a victim. And sorry to interject here, but like I loved that their judgment with her like shifted and paralleled when they started to realize like this is just like Crosshair. This is exactly what Crosshair is going through. And there's a moment later in the episode that I thought capped that perfectly. And being able to see that like this is what war does to people, and people can change and get better and make decisions that are conscious for themselves was just amazing. Because when we see people redeemed in Star Wars, usually it's because they're sacrificing themselves and dying. And what we get with Crosshair and Ventress is so unique in that they have this like opportunity to like consider being better people and atoning for what they did and doing something good instead.
The opposite of what they did with Vader, the opposite of what they did with Kylo Ren. And I like that. That was very well said. Adam, what did you think?
Yeah, well, I mean, Clone Force 99 was kind of pissing me off during that scene because they were being hypocritical, reductive, like closed-minded, and very like single focus. Because they were like, she's an assassin. I was like, to just call her at this stage an assassin is like, that is that's like one way to look at one very small part of her life. I was like, you wouldn't look like none of these Hunter, Wrecker, Crosshair. They wouldn't want people looking at them and be like, oh, well, you executed. You're the reason that the Empire's taken, because that wouldn't be fair to them either. Just like it's not fair to call Asajj Ventress an assassin who shouldn't be around Omega. They were kind of pissing me off during that scene. Like, it's pretty rare that I'm like really rooting against those clones, but I was like, okay, y'all are being assholes right now, and you're not making any sense. Like, so I don't know. You guys said it perfectly. That was a great scene, but they were pissing me off because they were just being really reductive and hypocritical.
It's because the dad batch is fully engaged. They are overprotective dads who, when daughter comes home with a new friend, they got their guns on their side and they're saying, "Hey, you better get my daughter back by 9 p.m." That's what they're doing it, because not only has Hunter always been that way, but Crosshair is that way now too. So you're absolutely right. It was hypocritical, but it's just them, I think, fully going on the defense mode, because the overprotectiveness is coming from not just Hunter now, but Crosshair as well. When we get to these final tests, this is a moment that we've been alluding to for a while. The final one, they're in the boat, and as Ventress is kind of showing off, She summons a giant lion sea octopus. Just finished my way through Avatar: The Last Airbender again and Legend of Korra again. It really gave me big giant lion turtle vibes. But this was the second cousin of the giant lion turtle, and this was the giant lion chameleon octopus. Was pretty darn cool, and Ventress really showing some communication with animals and beasts that we've really only seen from somebody like Ezra Bridger, who we've compared her to earlier. Adams, was this one of the parts that you were referring to with the similarities to Ezra and Kanan?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Anything when when a force user, a powerful force user like Ezra or like Ventress uses the force to connect to animals, and that will always remind me of Ezra. Like anytime somebody does that, but to me during this scene, I was like questioning by the end, was the test like Omega reaching out to try to call anything like that, or was the test like how they would? Because she tells them, she's like, you need to call them off, like so I can deal with this. And she trusted her completely. She was like, stand down and let Ventress handle this. I was asking myself, I was like, was that the test to see like how much she trusts Ventress? Because to me, it was already like that I almost read that as Ventress being like, I can see myself like if she already trusts me like this, she would be a good Padawan. She would be a good listener. She'd be a good student. If she's she's not gonna panic at the first sign. She's gonna trust in her teacher. Like, so to me, I didn't even view it as a failure when she reached out and couldn't connect like Ventress could. It was a little funny when she was like, "You don't even know what you're doing." I was like, it reminded me of that meme where it's like, "Honey, you got a big storm coming," because I was like, you have no idea how strong she is. But yeah, that scene definitely reminded me of Ezra. But I also feel like while she couldn't reach out and connect with any of the Omega, couldn't reach out and connect with the animals, I still feel like she showed some intangibles there, some things that would definitely allude to her being a really, really good force user and a good student and just a good force user, like I said.
And I don't want to compare her to Sabine just from the sense of how in tune they are with the Force, because we don't know that about Omega yet, especially based on what Ventress said. She was definitely saying, no, she doesn't seem to have many very high M count, but it was very tongue in cheek. I got very big similarities to Sabine in terms of they've just been trained and wired so polar opposite of what one would need to do to be in tune with the Force that's why they can't tune into it correctly. But where we do see that Force sensitivity the most with Omega, it's making decisions in battle. It's making those split-second choices because what has she been trained in battle? And so I do think that's something we could see going forward. And even though she'll probably be maybe more powerful with the Force potentially than Sabine, I think she needs to figure out how to break a few habits first. What do you think, Catrina?
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought up Sabine because that's exactly who I was going to bring up. This reminded me a lot of when she first trained with Kanan, and she was like, "I'm not a Jedi. I don't know how to do this." Blah 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 blah. And Kanan goes later and is talking to Hera, and it's like she just needs to be open to it. She just needs to open that door to the Force and let herself feel it. And I think that this episode wasn't about like, whoa, let's make Omega like Force powerful. It was more like, let's open Omega to the idea that could happen, that she is capable of that this meditation she's been doing this season was alluding to that in the first place for me. And to have a patient master like Ventress, which is so wild to say. To have a patient master like Ventress is just so exciting when it comes to thinking about Omega's future and what she could tap into if she feels like it, if she chooses that path and opens herself up to the Force. What could she become? But yeah, I definitely saw that. I did see that parallel of like Sabine and Omega, except for the fact that Omega was actually like, cool, okay, yeah, like I'm game, like let's do it. So yeah, and then I do want to talk about Ventress connecting with that animal, the octopus turtle thing, because it also calls back again to Dark Disciple, that giant sea snake fish that Night Sisters essentially have to chip away at for hundreds of years, cutting off parts of its body, abusing it, tapping into the dark side of the Force and like slowly killing it. So seeing her interact with this creature and stop and want to protect it because it doesn't know what's happening. Like, it was just called up from its house. Somebody banged on the door. Of course it's going to overreact and want to defend itself. And so Ventress connecting with that is such a wonderful way to call back to what she used to be and now what she chooses to be, even in spite of her heritage, you know?
Couldn't agree more. And I haven't read the book, and now you're very much enticing me to do so, because I do love Night Sisters lore as well, with everything that they've dove into in the Jedi Fallen Order and Jedi Survivor games. I just want to know more. The stuff with Maul and Savage Opress in Clone Wars and through Rebels, it just makes me want to know more. So definitely something I am interested in diving into. Where do you, Adam, you touched on this a bit before, so I'll go to you first, and then I want to see your take as well, Catrina. But is this the Bad Batch and Omega? Their worlds collide with Ventress this episode, and now that they're going to impact each other but go their separate paths? Or is this going to be a connection that will be a very big part of the rest of the season, either as master and apprentice or as a new ally in their fight, somebody who doesn't necessarily have the same thought process, same ideals, but they have the same priority, which is protecting Omega?
So I'm more inclined to say it would be the latter. And of the two options that you gave there, I think it's more likely that not that she is immediately all of a sudden she's the teacher and Omega's the Padawan. I'd be surprised if that's kind of where we pick up in an episode or two. That to me seems more like a thread that they're more likely to pick up on in another show or something, or a movie, however they decide to do it. Because like I said earlier, it just seems if we're going to also do that now, I can see her being, an ally in this fight they have ahead, because she has a very personal stake and all this stuff. And I think she has a really strong, like Ventress, I'm saying she has a very strong desire to do right. So I can absolutely see her, joining them for this fight. Not on anybody's turn. Just like when the clones say in this episode, well, we don't do so well with following orders. Well, neither does Ventress, and that she's not going to listen to anything y'all have to say, but she's still going to she's got everybody's best interests at heart. She's going to go out and I think she'll join the fight kind of in her own way, but I don't know. I'm thinking about how this episode ended, which I can't wait to talk about that final scene when she mentions everything to them, because that really just threw me completely off. It was nothing like what I was expecting. I still was just left feeling like we may not get her. I hope we do. It seems really goofy to bring her in. Now she did get the spotlight this episode. There was no better way to do a Ventress episode than they did this to me. But I wouldn't be stunned. I'd be upset, but I wouldn't be stunned if we don't see her again. Maybe until after the final battle or something, and then she joins back up with them and offers to teach something like that. I can see something like that. But if she's not on the ship and constantly helping out and in contact with them for the rest of the season, I kind of wouldn't be surprised. And I'm a little upset about that, because now that she's here, I don't want her to just go away again. I want her to be a central part of the next 6, 7, 8. I don't even remember exactly how many episodes we have. The next several episodes until the end. I want her to be there.
It's like when you're texting somebody for the first time and that you think they're really cool, and you're just like, I want more of this person and I'd love to be in contact with them more. But let's be real, that's not Ventress. She's not gonna be chat texting them all the time. She's not gonna be FaceTiming every evening, seeing what they're up to, but she'll probably be there to protect Omega when she needs to be, because what does she care about above all else? Making sure another young woman who is powerful and has potential doesn't get taken advantage of by the Empire and the dark side. What do you think, Catrina? Are their paths going to converge again? I'm kind of starting to feel like this series will come to a close with Omega and Ventress departing together. I don't think that's going to happen until the end, but I kind of think that's how it's going to end.
Yeah, I'm definitely on the same page as you with that. And I think that this whole M count thing, that in itself is what Ventress's objective was coming into this episode. She found a young person, a young woman with an M count. She needed to go investigate it. And it looks like she's in her ship right now, like I said, is different from her normal ship. And Quinlan Vos flew off with it at the end of Dark Disciple, not to spoil everything. But she's in what is essentially a scouting ship. Ventress is out scouting for M Count people so that she can find a way to protect them. And whether that's with the path, as it was mentioned with in Obi-Wan, Quinlan Vaz is involved with the path, or some other way, we don't know just yet. But I'm very much on the same page where like I don't feel like we're going to have Ventress around in every episode. As much as I would love her around every single day, I love her so much. I think that when she departs at the end of this episode, she's doing so with an eye on the group. Like whether they like it or not, or they know it or not, I feel like she's going to know where they are. And if there is a situation where Omega is in a lot of danger, we're going to see Ventress come back and help and defend her, especially if what's happening on Tantus has to do with M Count subjects. Ventress is going to want to be involved in whatever's happening there. So there's definitely like an opening for her to come back. But I think she's got a lot of stuff going on right now if she's running around the galaxy trying to protect and find these people. But there's another point that just like blew out of my head. Maybe I'll remember it in a second.
Adam, any final thoughts on the episode and where the season could go from here?
Yeah, I mean, lastly, I just want to say that conversation at the end, like, I don't know what I was expecting, but like, in my head, I was imagining this where she either says she doesn't have it, or it's like the Emperor is after her because her M count is higher than she showed that, you know, like how they talk about choosing the Avatar in Avatar: The Last Airbender, right? They're like, out of 1,000 toys, like, it maybe not necessarily be they showed this great display of it. It was like Omega did these 3 little things that lead me to believe that, but it's just like, yeah, she could have potential. Like with it, I was like, wait, that's it? Like, I know I'm repeating what I said at the beginning, but it threw me off because we've been talking about this the whole season, the MK, and then she is so violently curious, Omega is, to learn about her potential with this. And like, even going against the wishes of the Bad Batch, which, like you said, TJ, that was a great call earlier, that her Force abilities could, like, we already kind of see some of that in her really quick and brilliant decision making. And we talked about this during Ahsoka, that I was 100% on board with Sabine being a Force user, but I would have loved for it to have been, because the Force is like such a mysterious thing that you can use in so many different ways. So I'm kind of tired of every time we reveal a new Force user, them doing it with them like swinging their lightsaber to themselves or pushing I'm like, let them do something completely different. That we see Cal Kestis like tapping into using the Force echoes and doing things like that. Make up a bunch of cool abilities and do cool shit like that. Like, not everybody needs to pull their lightsaber towards them or smash a rock or throw somebody across a gap.
Rey with her healing, Ezra and like with the animals, Cal with the echo. I agree 100%.
Of our music.
Yes,
exactly. Yeah. So I would love to get to see something like that for her, where maybe Omega is not going to be like, she's not going to be on a battlefield swinging a lightsaber and throwing people around and doing all this. But maybe like her future is like, she's a great tactician although she's not completely tapped, and not saying that she needs the Force to do that, but there's been a lot of great tacticians, but that's like, for her, that could be the
Hunter
ultimate thing that makes her.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. So like Hunter, but can use the Force to help kind of see and play, because Yoda talks about that all the time, like being able to see like vague visions of the future and these kinds of things. So I hope that's what I said that about Sabine too, that I hope that was what was in store for her. Ultimately, that wasn't what we got. I hope we get something like that for Omega, where it's not just where somebody near the end of the season is like, Crosshair's about to get crushed by a rock, and they pan over and she's holding her hands up, I'm kind of tired. That stuff has grown, personally for me, has grown a little bit thin. So I hope it's not something like that, but even more like we see with Finn too, who's just like, it's a feeling. Like, maybe she, like everybody in the group later this season, is thinking about, we have to do this. And she's like, I just need you all to trust me. I don't know what it is, but there's something telling me we shouldn't do this, or we should. And then she ends up being right. Like, that to me would hit so much harder than her saving somebody by lifting a big rock or something like that. I hope we get something like that.
I think a prime example of that is Leia. Like from the
Mhm.
start, even before she knew she had the Force, she was a strong decision maker as a teenager, and this was all because she was attuned to that. And so I think it would be great to see, like you said, more tacticians within the Force who their decisions are based on like this very strong, keen intuition. So yeah, I love that idea. And then when it comes to like the departure, one of the things I wanted to bring up, and sorry to interrupt and like go off on this, but like when we think about Ventress and the choices she is making, like not only is she probably handling several cases of like M count subjects who need to be saved, she also sees a young woman with a family who taking her away from that family right now especially would be entirely against everything that Ventress stands for, because it would be essentially doing the same thing that was done to her. And so when I saw her go like, maybe she has it, maybe she doesn't, I was like, she's lying. Like she knows that Omega is Force sensitive, has an M count, all that, but she sees that Omega has a family. She sees that Omega has a protective force around her who will hopefully keep her safe, so that Ventress doesn't have to pick her up right now. So that when they figure this whole thing out, maybe Ventress comes back, and when Omega's ready to leave, she can make that decision to go into like training or mentoring or whatever. But what Ventress sees is that Omega's fine exactly where she is, and ripping her away from that would be awful. It would be against everything she stands for.
I love
And
that.
it's another one of those reasons that this, and you mentioned it one of the very first things we talked about in one of the very first things we talked about in the episode was you talked about how she's kind of like a mirrored version of Ahsoka a little bit. And I think that's so interesting because the very first time we see Ahsoka, it's the opposite. It's Mando trying to say, "Hey, Ahsoka, train Grogu, please. Like train him in the Force. I need somewhere to take this kid." And it's her saying no, but for a very different reason. It's because she doesn't feel ready to do that based on all of her traumas and everything she has seen gone wrong. Whereas then we see Ventress through this episode once again be like, I could take her, but I don't want to break her up from this family for a big other reason too, of like, if you take her away, she'll be able to learn the Force, but is that more important than what she has right now? And I think that's what we're seeing Star Wars take a big leap towards, is going away from the binary, where we see they're nowhere near as binary in the High Republic saga. Then throughout the whole Skywalker saga, the Jedi Order is very, this is right, this is wrong, this is good, this is bad, this is how we do it. And now we're seeing so many characters like Rey, like Ahsoka, like Ventress, do things their own way, carve their own paths through the light, through the darkness, through the middle, that are totally different than the Jedi and the Sith did through the prequel, sequel, and original trilogy, which I think is very exciting about where they could go beyond further in Star Wars. Catrina, I sold you a little bit short at the beginning of the episode where I just said that you were co-host of Padre Pascal, because I know you have so many other things going on the go as well. So give us the Ventress short stories, the podcast, the where you're writing, everything. Where can the people find all of this stuff?
Yeah, you can find my two Ventress short stories, Ventress Golden and oh my goodness, what's the name? Owl of the Banshee, which is a two-part story, a short story duology about how Ventress constructs her new saber and how she got her bounty hunting ship, and the journey that she takes, the personal journey she takes while acquiring these items. There's about 45 or an hour worth of reading in those two short stories, and I'm very, very proud of them. You can find them wherever I am, OhCatrina on the internet. I've posted them all over the place, so it wouldn't take a lot of scrolling to find them. And they are free to read online. They're fan-created stories that I think would be really nice. And even after watching this episode, I'm like, yeah, it could still work. It doesn't break canon what I have in those stories. So kind of cool to have those like feel like they're in world. Of course, I am the co-host of Pedro Pascal, the podcast about Pedro Pascal, which I co-host with the amazing Rachel Leishman. And you can search that up. It's called Pedro Pascal. It's not very hard to miss. I also host What's Glup, a podcast about everyone's favorite little scrungly guys in Star Wars. We talk about minor characters, characters that are in the background. This past week, we released an episode with my dear friend Tommy Stella about Droopy McCool, and we've got some really cool episodes coming up. I'm actually about to hop onto another recording about Ventress for that show. And then I also host In the Cantina with OhCatrina on my Twitch channel, and you can find that every Monday on my Twitch. What else do I do? Oh God. I do a number of other things. I've also been the assistant producer of the web series Looking for Leia, a docu-series about the contributions of women, non-binary folk, and folks who just usually aren't highlighted in documentaries about the Star Wars fandom. You can find that on lookingforleia.com, and you can watch it for free now, which is awesome. And also I'm on Patreon, so look for me anywhere. I'm OhCatrina, OhCatrina. And thank you both for having me on, and congratulations, TJ.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much for joining us, because you were absolutely incredible. Your knowledge, not only on Ventress, but with Star Wars in general, is just absolutely next level. And we are so honored to have your insights on the show. Make sure you check all of that out. And of course, check out the Agents of Fandom on socials at Agents Fandom on Twitter and TikTok, Agents of Fandom everywhere else. If you're listening to us on YouTube, like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and make sure you follow the Agents of Fandom wherever you get your podcasts. You can also check out our brand new store, fandomify.com, right down there. If you're watching us on YouTube, you can get some cool new merch, including this Avatar: The Last Airbender inspired Agents of Fandom sweater. We'll have another episode without myself, but Adam and Fat Thor, aka TJ Pastilli, will be talking X-Men 97 and Invincible later in the week. And I think that is about it. That will cover it. Thank you once again for joining us, Catrina. On behalf of myself, Adam, and all the Agents of Fandom, thank you so much for tuning in, everyone, and we will see you next time. Peace.
Peace.